Hey there. So, a couple weeks ago, Dr. James White of Alpha and Omega Ministries did a Dividing Line episode that touched on some topics that I find interesting, and so I thought I'd throw together a response to some of it. He primarily discusses theological issues on his show. However, in the episode entitled No Creator, No Humanity, or Of Apes and Men, great title by the way, in that episode he touches on some current events. And really, the best way I can describe this is that he goes into a number of different rants, primarily aimed at millennials, but also atheists and abortion advocates, and really anyone who holds to a secular morality. Basically, what I took from this episode is that this new generation of millennials, which I guess technically includes me, barely, this new generation is a dumbed-down, morally repugnant bunch of heathens who've thrown off the shackles of God belief, which in turn has resulted in things like transgenderism and increased rates of abortion and things like that. And, it's amazing to me that someone so knowledgeable in history fails to see that sort of humorous repeated pattern of, the older generation blaming the younger one for the nation's moral decline. You get a lot of that in this video, and it's really nothing new, right? These sorts of geriatric outbursts have been around for a very long time, right? Old people have always been complaining about the moral bankruptcy of the next generation. But this next generation is different, says Dr. White. This is, well, I'll just let him explain it to you.
This is the first American generation that has been thoroughly secularized. This is the first generation that has been freed from the restraints of a worldview that civilized us. People are wondering, where did this insanity come from? The insanity comes from the fact that when you have a culture that embraces a worldview that recognizes the existence of a creator and hence a moral and ethical law that exists above and beyond the gray matter between my ears, that you have a civilized society. But when you lose that, you no longer have a civilized society. You have a barbaric society.
So let's start with, this is the first generation that has been thoroughly secularized. Dr. White is simply factually incorrect here. According to the Pew Research Center, over half of millennials have an absolute certain belief in God, and nearly half of them pray once or more a day. And granted, millennials do have a lower percentage than previous generations in both of these categories, but it's nothing near the extreme statement that Dr. White makes that this is the first generation that's thoroughly secularized. That's just not true. If they were thoroughly secularized, nearly half wouldn't be certain that God exists, and even a higher percentage attesting to the existence of heaven and hell. But it's worse than that, because not only are his facts wrong, he ties concepts like civility and incivility to God belief, which he asserts is necessary for a civil society. This is an embarrassingly simplistic way to approach cultural ethics. It's myopic and it's lazy. You don't have to do the work of nuance. There's no complexity to it. It's as simple as, this group collectively believes in God, so of course they're civil. And this group over here doesn't, and so they're barbaric. There's black, and then there's white, and that's it. The irony here, of course, is that Dr. White complains in this video about how millennials are essentially throwing off the shackles of traditional values, and he does this by engaging in the very narrow-minded thinking that typically makes millennials run away from those traditional values to begin with. I mean, part of the problem that's typically ignored by evangelical Protestants is the inflexibility of the church. And I don't even mean to necessarily change their doctrinal positions to conform to the cultural zeitgeist, but really even just to listen, to at least try to understand marginalized perspectives outside of the bound of their canon. It's this one-dimensional, sort of simple-minded approach to really complex issues. Think sexuality or being gay, for example. It's that very simplistic mindset that makes people feel less inclined to seek answers from traditional avenues like the church. Both Dr. White and his friends at Apologia Studios are notoriously guilty of this, and probably proudly so. If you go check out their Facebook pages, for example, you'll find tons of memes about gay and transgendered people that contain the same sort of shallow, narrow-minded, the Bible says it, therefore I believe it sort of approach, right? That same simplistic approach to complex issues is also mimicked in many other areas of the American church that we're probably all familiar with. Creationism, ring a bell? But I got to go back to this idea that recognizing the existence of a creator and thus a moral law is what makes a culture civilized. Never mind that the distinction between civil and uncivil is married to historically forceful systems of power in which a ruling class assigns particular behaviors and even entire races of people into these categories. They're married to structures of power, and that power shifts over time. Never mind the complexities of moral behavior, the ethical evolution and work that a culture goes through in times of transition, such that what was once considered civil or uncivil is now not. But no, I mean, why contemplate those things, right? It's as simple as, do they believe in God? Right? It's like Dr. White woke up one day and was like, I got an idea. Let's take entire fields like sociology and ethics and let's just toss them into the lake of fire, right? Not only should we hurl the atheists in there, but let's do away with nuance as well. After all, as he says at the 24-minute mark of his video, what civilizes is recognition of who we are as creatures of God. But even a God-fearing Baptist can drop an atomic weapon and eviscerate 100,000 Imago Dei. Did you know that around the time the atomic bomb was dropped, about 70% of the United States was Protestant, about 22% were Catholic? There was a huge cultural recognition of the existence of a creator, and yet we tore at the flesh of others much like we've always done. Collectively acknowledging God does not make a society any more moral, right? Look at Israel in the Bible. Instead, it allows them to engage in the same kind of heinous acts a secular society might engage in, just, with the added benefit of knowing that they can be forgiven for it. It actually makes immorality palatable. I mean, if you really wanted me to, right, I could pull out that old canard about all of the atrocities committed by collective groups of people who believed in God, and many of whom were devoted Christians. Never suffer a witch to live, that sort of thing. I mean, some of the most uncivil things you can imagine were done by people in even whole societies who had a moral law written on their heart. And that's so obvious that I actually feel stupid telling you that. Dr. White continues by saying that without God, there cannot be any shared cultural values. That's why whatever the state says is the ultimate good. That's just demonstrably wrong too, right? Look at honesty. Honesty is a shared cultural value. This is why we penalize perjurers. In fact, crime itself, like the whole idea of unlawful acts, rests upon something as simple as a society collectively saying, these are the things we want to minimize. And bless your heart, Dr. White, you don't need God for that. You just need a bunch of people to nod their head in agreement about the sort of society that they want to live in. I mean, even our mere existence is a shared cultural thing that we value, which is why we collectively decry violence and murder. There are plenty of broad, overreaching areas in which our culture collectively values the same thing, and we don't need to recognize God before recognizing these other things. Now, you may want to argue that God is the necessary ontological foundation for morality or for shared value, but that's a completely different thing than what you actually said. Also, just because people disagree on particular specifics in each of these different areas, or maybe how best to cash out their implementation, that doesn't mean that we don't share common value, and nor does it follow that acknowledging God is necessary for that common value. And it's a silly thing to say that if we simply added God to this cultural melting pot, that things would be any different. Recognition of what God? Your God? Which version of your God? The one that emphasizes grace and the doctrine of predestination, or the one that rejects it and emphasizes freedom of the human will? The one who would have us collectively worship on Saturday, or the one who doesn't care? The one who requires baptism, or the one who doesn't? I mean, division is not something that is going to go away when a culture affirms belief in God. It only magnifies it. Interpretation doesn't suddenly vanish because you throw a recognition of God into the mix. Around the 27-minute mark of this episode, you mentioned that you're fearful that our society has access to things like nuclear weapons and the ability to alter the human genome. All of this, you say, is in the hands of people with no moral guardrails. But wait a minute, there's a difference between no moral guardrails and guardrails that are there but they're formed with stolen materials. In other words, there's a difference between the collapse into sheer barbarism and anarchy and a culture that recognizes moral imperatives, but they're simply hijacked from a Judeo-Christian framework. I really want to assume that what you mean by this is that a thoroughly secular culture cannot ground the moral and ethical systems that they put in place, because to imply that God is the only candidate for the position of a moral guardrail is just idiotic. Like, I don't kill my next door neighbor not because God tells me not to. I don't kill my next door neighbor because I don't want to harm him or his family. I don't want to cause them that kind of pain and suffering and sorrow because I have the ability to empathize. In fact, I wouldn't even do it if God told me to do it, right? I would tell him what a shitty moral guardrail he's being and that my vote goes to the empathy moral guardrail. I forgot what we're talking about now. Okay, so Dr. White brings up human cloning as a recent ethical issue. And this is kind of ironic because we have systems of ethics in place when it comes to things like cloning, right? There's actually ethical work that needs to be done in addressing complex bioethical issues like this. I mean, I know it's really easy to just sit back and go, well, it ain't right for us to play God, or they can't have more than one soul. I know that's really easy to do, but bioethics as an entire field shows us that we take very seriously moral guardrails that have zero to do with what God thinks of the whole situation. Like, we're actually putting in work, right? We're starting from the bottom up and looking at complex moral implications. And if we didn't, if there really was, as you put it, no moral guardrails, then we wouldn't have the apparatuses in place that we do. And they're not going to go away in the next 20 years, Dr. White. They're probably only going to get more complex. So here's what I think is happening with you. It's not that there can't be any moral guardrails without God or any shared cultural values without God. It's that those shared cultural values and moral intuitions are starting to shift. They're starting to move away from your very rigid interpretation of the way the world is. And you don't know how to handle this, and so you complain. And I totally get that, right? It's like when you're a child and nobody wants to play the same game as you that you want to play anymore, and so you take your ball and you go home, right? And on your way home, you mumble to yourself, they'll see soon enough that I'm gone. They'll be sorry, right? And like, there's actually a place in your video where you do something like this in this very show. I guess in a recent conversation that you had with a couple of women on the topic of abortion, I think it was on Twitter or something. In that conversation, you mentioned that these two women emphasized their own bodily autonomy in their conversation with you. And that really bothered you. And so here was your classic response on your show.
I have to keep reminding myself that person will stand in the presence of a holy God and answer for that perversity.
And this is exactly what I'm talking about here, right? Like, I have to keep reminding myself that although I'm powerless now to force these people to adopt my perspective, I'm on the team with all the power, and you're going to see one day. That simple deferment of, I can't do anything about it now, but you're going to get what's coming to you one day. That ressentiment, that centerpiece of your religious tradition, has been polished for 2,000 years. And you know what? It's still as dirty now as it was when Jesus admonished his followers to take the lowest seat at the dinner table so that one day they could take the highest seat, to turn the other cheek when slapped, and to pray for your enemies. I mean, what a wonderfully humble thing to do, especially since we both know an everlasting and eternal punishment awaits those lousy bastards. See, you can't help but moan at the state of the culture and complain about it, at the next generation who sees the world differently than you, because you're powerless to change it. You've lost. You can't really move forward and evolve with the rest of the culture due to the rigidity of your interpretive framework, and so you turn it into a virtue. The only thing you can do is be the boy who takes his ball and goes home. And that's where I think all this geriatric ranting and raving, this sense of moral superiority that's littered throughout this video, this resentment, that's where I think all this is coming from. I mean, dude, just go watch a Matlock episode. Like, it's going to be okay. The world's going to continue on, and you're going to die one day, and your grandkids are going to think that, transgendered people being able to use the bathroom of their choice is a completely normal thing. I mean, it's really not that bad. And look, if I'm wrong and Obama somehow retains his power in the next 8 months and ushers in a new secular age of destruction, which I've been told for the last 8 years has been coming, if that happens, you always have the comfort of knowing that one day he and people like him will be judged and sent to an everlasting punishment where there will be a weeping and gnashing of teeth. So at least you have that to comfort you. So, chill.